And welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on Chicago Access Network Television. I'm your host, Andy Thayer, and with me tonight is Paige May of We Charge Genocide.
Hi.
And We Charge Genocide, and thanks to Paige's activism and that of many others, has been really in the news of late. They have been among the principal organizers of all the different Black Lives protests that we've seen, and have been really totally active. And as an activist myself, I very much respect that. We in GLN do, and we're going to be telling you a little bit about what We Charge Genocide is doing, and Paige is going to describe her organization. Give us just a thumbnail sketch before we head into announcements here, Paige, about what is We Charge Genocide.
In a sentence, it's a grassroots intergenerational effort to center the voices and experiences of those who are most affected by police violence, which is young Black and brown people in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about the ways that you do that, please.
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about We Charge Genocide is we're intentionally not a nonprofit. We are not a coalition. We're not a group, right? We're an effort. We come out of a response, a moment of grief and despair over the murder of Dominique Franklin, a 23-year-old Black man who was murdered by the CPD in May of last year. And so there was this moment of young folk, especially, who knew him, feeling like nothing could be done, that his life, according to the state, didn't matter. And so older folk, especially Black women, saw that, recognized it, and brought together networks of people who have been organizing against police violence for years in the city, and asked them to do something to support these young people, and to specifically to go to the United Nations and to do an effort that would go to the UN in a way that felt like it honored Dominique Franklin, his friends, and other young Black and brown folks. So that's roughly what we've been up to.
Oh, great, May. Well, before we talk a little bit more about We Charge Genocide and the views on various things, Paige's views on various things, we want to call your attention to some very important activities coming up here in the city. First of all, we have an important event tomorrow. Get it up on your screen there. A number of women, it being Mother's Day weekend, are coming together tomorrow on Saturday to honor their loved ones who've been killed by Chicago police. Paige, could you say a few words about some of the people that we see up on the screen here? It's a little bit hard to see from our vantage point, but another of the moms are coming together in a very sad kind of Mother's Day tomorrow.
Yeah, so we see here several Black young folk who have been murdered by the Chicago Police Department. One in particular really is important to me that she's on the screen, and that is Rekia Boyd. She was a 22-year-old Black woman who was coming home from a party, hanging out with her friends, and she was shot in the head by an off-duty police officer who was also drunk at the time. And folks might have heard he was actually charged, but he was found not guilty. And so he now still has his job. He still is a free person who murdered this young person, Rekia.
And this important event is going to, again, it's tomorrow, even though Mother's Day is Sunday, 6 p.m., beginning at the intersection of 67th and Indiana. So please make it out there. It should be a really powerful event tomorrow night. And we'll get these announcements up later on your screen as well. Later in this month, there's going to be an event at the Third Unitarian Church out on Chicago's west side. How do we defend and expand our rights in an age of austerity and increased state violence? If you're not sick of hearing my voice tonight, you can come out to that event coming at the Third Unitarian Church, again, 10 a.m. Sunday, May 17th. All are welcome at 301 North Mayfield. And then people have probably heard about the oral arguments about LGBT rights in the U.S. Supreme Court. They are currently debating whether or not equal marriage rights should be extended to same-sex couples around the country. But as we in GLN have argued, this is about much more than marriage, as important as those rights are, and that this is about whether or not LGBT people are going to finally have citizenship in this country, because citizenship is defined as having the same legal rights as your peers, and that's something that we have yet to achieve in this country. Even though there's many other important issues for LGBTs beyond that, we haven't even made that first baby step. And so we're going to be having, in conjunction with people around the country, rallies and vigils and protests on the evening that the Supreme Court makes its decision public, and that's probably going to be sometime in June. So watch the news for that, and on that day, make your way to the Center on Halsted in the Lakeview neighborhood, 7 p.m., the Center on Halsted in the 3800 block of North Halsted. And then finally, of course, next month is Pride Month, and we in the Gay Liberation Network, as we always have, will be marching in the Pride Parade. That's going to be the last Sunday of the month, and it's going to be Sunday, June 28th. We do not have a specific time for the parade, but the parade route will be much the same as it has in the last several years, starting in the Uptown neighborhood. Here are just a few quick pictures of last year's march. If you want to hear about how you can get involved in the Pride Parade and have the political contingent, please email us at lgbtliberation@aol.com, and we'll get you hooked up about that. Last year, as you see, we had a contingent in support of immigration rights. Each year we choose a political theme. We're getting ready to announce our next theme for this June, so stay tuned for that. So, Paige, we had a situation in Baltimore, obviously, where there was a lot of turmoil and the press grinding its hands saying, oh, this horrible violence, property destruction. And I saw some things online that were truly remarkable in spite of that kind of mainstream commentary. People saying, well, the Bank of America, when it foreclosed on homes in Baltimore, destroyed far more property. Where's the concern about that? And as a longtime anti-war activist, I say, well, here you're talking about, the problem with civilian violence. What about each time this country invades another country? How about all these drone attacks where 20 innocents get killed for every successful, quote-unquote, attack on an alleged terrorist? So what are your thoughts on this hype about violence, this hype about civilians doing things that aren't just the usual protests?
Yeah, I'll make it fast because I see we have a caller, but I think we need a more complicated understanding of what violence is, right? I'm really proud of Baltimore, and I don't ever think of self-defense as violence, right? And that's, I see folks defending and asserting that their life matters. And so we have interpersonal violence, which gets talked about a lot, but something that I see much more on the daily grind for Black folk especially is state violence, right? And whether that's through the closing of public schools or mental health services, whether that's through police violence, right, is a very common thing that people are taking to the streets right now, whether it's the lack of investment being made into our neighborhoods, all of those things I understand as forms of violence. And so when people defend themselves against that, I don't see that as violence. I see that as self-defense. And so I'm proud of what they're up to.
And arguably, we would not have gotten the indictments of Freddie Gray's killers had it not been for that. Because, I mean, Black people, especially in this country, have been being killed all the time. I mean, how many years did we go in this town with former police commander John Burge torturing people? Literally over 100 people, him and his crew, and yet nothing was done against him until finally he was indicted for perjury. And arguably, that only happened because of the years' worth of protests. He was only fired from the Chicago Police Department in the wake of the Rodney King Rebellion. So clearly, the riots, yes, and the other protests worked in terms of forcing the state to indict these cops. Now, we're not out of the woods because we've seen with our own Anita Alvarez, Cook County State's attorney, in terms of her dealing with Rekia Boyd's killer, that they can purposely screw up the prosecution. But it is remarkably, we would not have gotten the federal investigation that was promised yesterday in the news of Freddie Gray's killers had it not been for the violence, so-called.
Yeah, I think that our movements matter, right? And I'm about creating more of them, for sure.
So we do have a caller.
And your
Hi.
guest as well. In terms of the Cook County State's Attorney, we could take care of that mess when it comes voting time, all right? And send a message that way. But when you was talking about gay marriage with the Supreme Court, and I'm just talking about facts, okay? What's going to wind up happening, I see this trend, when you look at marriage across the board, it's going to be down. And just in the next 10 years, whatever, gays is not going to want to be married because they're going to be a reflection of the rest of the population. And I don't think that's going to be the big issue in the next 10 years. I think what the big issue going to be is, and you've heard me say this before, and I think it's going to be wrong. They're going to come up with a test where parents be able to see whether or not their child is gay. And if that's not genocide, I don't know what is. And I hate for that day going to come. And how are we going to deal? I think that should be one of the biggest issues gays should be talking about, this type of genocide that will occur. You know, I understand some things should be between a woman and a doctor, but such as where your child is gay or not, you be able to have this test, you're going to kill a child because they maybe perhaps have gay tendencies or something like that. I think that is wrong. We're going to have that discussion. And gay marriage, that's going to be on the back burner.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so, but listening to the tenor of the oral arguments, you could arguably say that Kennedy, who's seen as a swing vote, could vote against us because, frankly, the arguments marshaled against him by our side were quite weak. This is subject of an entire another show. In fact, our June show is going to be on this whole issue, caller. So I won't go into our thoughts about that, but clearly the issues are changing for the LGBT community in terms of we really need to be focusing on the big ticket items of things like LGBT youth homelessness. We've won, and I wrote an article to this effect, we've won a lot of things in the LGBT community, but they've all been inexpensive gains. And people look at the LGBT community and say, oh, you guys are going from strength to strength. Well, in terms of things that actually cost the government, things that cost private business big money, the sort of things that were won during the Great Depression, in terms of jobs programs and so forth. We haven't taken on anything like that in the LGBT community, and given that we are in an age of austerity, it's going to be a lot more difficult to win those things. And that's one of my personal arguments for why LGBTs need to be in alliance with other communities who are facing many of the same issues that we are. We've got another call. We'll try and squeeze another call here. Go ahead, caller.
I had a question about, I guess, the exposure of police brutality within the Chicago Police Department. President Toni Preckwinkle was on a KNTV show on Wednesday where she talked about the case of a young man named Laquan McDonald, I think, and she said that I guess there was video of him being shot 16 times by a Chicago police officer that was so bad that the city's offered his mother upwards of $5 million before she even sued, I guess because the video is that, bad. But they've essentially refused to release the footage to the public, and I think that the public has the right to see what happened. And I wanted to know if, that is a fight in which this group is engaged to kind of get, more information about these cases released to the public, and what, if anything, can be done to compel our elected officials to be transparent when things like this happen.
Well, the CPD is notorious about thumbing its noses at Freedom of Information Act requests. In fact, I work at a place where they have to regularly sue the police to get them to follow the law. Boy, that doesn't sound unfamiliar, does it, Paige?
Right.
And I'm sure in your conversations with a number of the surviving members of different families, I know that moms have not been able to get police reports. They've not been able to get autopsies. Very basic information, which certainly as the loved one concerned, it's outrageous that they're disrespecting these families this way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can't imagine moving through grief and finding it without having basic information as to what happened. In the case of Laquan McDonald, I believe his family actually doesn't want the video released. They have specifically asked that it not be shown, and I want to respect that. I personally, as a Black person, am can't handle many more videos. I don't need to see another. The ways that it's being turned into a spectacle, I find very troublesome. What more evidence do we need to start actually doing something? Putting all this energy into getting the cops to release a video showing that they're killing us. It seems like a waste of energy. I think that there are much bigger things that we could be doing. For example, okay, so let's start going out as a community and watching the cops and making sure we're filming more of this stuff, rather than putting all of this pressure on getting one video that's going to show another black person being put on a spectacle, which dates back to, it reminds me of lynching, right? And how that was turned into sport. Like the word picnic comes out of lynching as a spectacle, as something that people participated in, where postcards and media were created that were consumed mostly by white folk. So I question the need. Why do we need to see this video? A black boy is dead. We know that. That should be enough.
On the other hand, there was, of course, the famous civil rights case where the young man was Emmett Till was murdered, and his mom, because the authorities were ignoring this lynching, and it was a different time, and that we couldn't even get the attention of the authorities to this horrible crime. And so I think it's up to the family.
Yeah, exactly.
They're the ones who are most affected. We've got another call here. Yes, caller.
Yes, good evening. I think it's important that you deal with facts instead of getting ahead of yourself and judging people. First of all, Freddie Gray was involved in what's called a structured settlement with Allstate Insurance. He had a surgery for a spinal issue, and while you would think someone would be recovering, he's out on the street selling drugs. And then there is nothing at this point that shows that these police officers have done anything wrong. But once again, you rush to judgment. You always encourage people to go above and beyond normal protest. You encourage people to get out there and engage in civil disobedience and destruction. Nothing good is done when people tear up a city claiming that somebody's been wrong. It's an excuse for people to loot. It doesn't help anybody. And again, these police officers are entitled to their day in court. And again, if you look at his at Freddie Gray's rap sheet and record, and also the fact that he's involved in the structured settlement and that you let it all play out, I think you'd see a different picture of exactly what type of individual he was, because there are certainly people in that city of Baltimore who are African American who haven't engaged in that kind of conduct. So
okay, I think we get your point, sir. I would just point that that drug dealing, even if that's what Mr. Gray was doing, is not a capital offense. And we live in a country where black people get targeted for criminal prosecution for drug dealing, and white people do the same thing, and very little happens to most white people when they're caught with marijuana or what have you. I just find it outrageous that you would suggest that we should have police, there's no problem with killing people before they've had their day in court. Damn it. I'm sorry, this makes me very, very angry. And yes, I don't think Page has ever argued. I've certainly never argued that police officers shouldn't have their day in court. But Freddie Gray sure as hell never got his day in court. He was murdered.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really interested in talking to folk about whether or not police violence is real. There are people who don't agree with me when I say that, and that's fine. You don't agree with me, then you don't agree. There are other people that are going to engage with you and try to show you how wrong you are. I'm too tired for that. So instead, I want to use this moment to just point out, like, the fact that it's not just the police, right? This is why it's not enough to send a few cops to jail, right? It's not enough to just indict cops and send them to jail, because it's actually a systemic problem. Policing is something that employs individuals as police officers, but is employed by a state which represents and protects white folk, right? White, straight folk particularly. And so that we have to understand how, even though most of us aren't cops, the ways that we are participating in an institution of policing, a racist, sexist, heterosexist, transphobic, able-bodied, right, system, and that all of us are implicated in that, especially the folks like the caller that just called in, who sits here and tries to tell me that, like, my people aren't being murdered by, like, every single 8 hours, every 8 hours, another of my people is dead. That I know. And if you don't know that, then go find out what the internet is. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have a situation where, according to the ACLU recent report, some 1,000 people last year were killed by police officers. Germany, a country that's a bit over a third as populous as the United States, had only 8 people killed last year. And so clearly there's something seriously wrong with policing in this country, that so many people are getting killed. The violence level in our society is way off the charts. You can say, well, Germany doesn't have guns. Well, look next door at Switzerland. Switzerland, every adult male has got a gun due to the way that country was formed, and yet their violence rate is similar to Germany's. Clearly, we've got something very, very sick, very, very ill in this country, and black people are on the major league receiving end of it. Not exclusively, but mainly on the receiving end, despite being 13% of the population. And the We Charge Genocide and organizations like it, to their eternal credit, are bringing this long-standing issue to the American public's attention and forcing a re-examine by some white people. I mean, these are not all black people at these protests. Fortunately, there's many young white people and Latinos and Asians that recognize just how sick our society is and are there in solidarity. And so when you do hear of a Black Lives Matters protest, whether by We Charge Genocide or any of the other organizations that have been doing this great work, I think it's duty bound for us as people who care about all lives matters to be there, because black people are on the total receiving end of this in this country right now. And certainly the history of John Burge torturing over 120 mainly African Americans in this city should tell that Chicagoans are not exempt from that racist legacy that we have to confront. So, my soapbox. We do have another caller here. Yes, caller.
Good evening. I want to say, first of all, not all police are bad, all right? There are, it's a fact, there are some bad ones out there. Now, we don't have enough of the good ones to turn the bad ones in. And when you talk about police officers, it don't matter whether they black or white. It's only one color, is blue. And he needs to check out some of the research, because there was a research Don Canotis did in terms of how people look at it, color. They had these small children, and they asked this white girl which they had black and Hispanic, which one is the bad one. And the white girl, maybe you've seen it, was they picked the black one as the bad one. And we got these sort of images even in small children's heads. And then when police are being trained, there was a report in Florida where they used images of black or brown people. They had on the firing line shooting at these. They had black and brown targets shooting at on the firing line. Even in their training. Okay,
caller, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut you short there, because we're running out of. Yes, we live in a thoroughly racist society. I mean, the one thing that I would say about this thing of bad cops, good cops, is that the problem isn't so much the psychopathic cops, because every large workforce is going to have at least a few of them. The problem are the so-called good cops who cover for them. And what we've seen over and over again in big city police forces, that the so-called good cops don't write the police reports that accurately reflect what went on. And I firmly believe that when you join a big city police force, you're very early faced with a moment of truth. Do you cover for your fellow officers who are violating people's rights, or do you do the right thing? And what we find out is that, A, it's very rare for officers to do the right thing and put their careers on the line, and B, when they do, their careers go into complete tailspin. They're totally ostracized by the rest of the force, and that starts right at the very top in the 5th floor of 35th in Michigan. But Paige, why don't you give your closing thoughts on that? Yeah. We're going to be moving on to our closing credits here in just a few moments with our few closing announcements.
Yeah, a friend of mine says it's not a problem of bad apples, it's a bad tree, and that we have a system that when folks like Burge, right, are out torturing people, they get promoted, right? And that's the problem. It's not that there are a few bad cops, it's that the whole institution is set up to repress black folk. That's what it's always been about. And so I believe in a justice system that asks who is harmed, how do we help them, and how do we make sure this never happens again. I don't think that involves police officers or people with guns. As an abolitionist, that's what I believe.
Okay. That's a big topic, and we don't have time for it tonight.
Google it.
Thank you so much, Paige. Go to wechargegenocide.org. We're going to close out here with a few quick announcements. Very important activities coming up in the city tomorrow at 6 p.m. On the south side here, at the intersection of 67th in Indiana. Moms of people who have been killed by Chicago police officers will be getting together. Please join that event. Coming up a little bit later this month, there's going to be, with all the talk about austerity and budget cuts, a question of how do we defend and expand our rights in an age of austerity and increased state violence. And that's going to be happening at the Third Unitarian Church at 10 a.m. Sunday, May 17th. All are welcome. And then, of course, we've got the Supreme Court decision coming up in June, probably. This is ostensibly about equal marriage rights, but really it's about legal equality for LGBT people. And if we win a decision our way, it's very incumbent upon us to push for full legal equality, not just in marriage, but also in issues of equal employment, housing, public accommodations, let alone the specifically civil rights issues of LGBT youth homelessness, LGBT positive education in the nation's schools and so forth. And that event will be happening here in Chicago as well as around the country. In Chicago, it'll be happening at 7 p.m. at the Center on Halsted in the 3800 block of North Halsted. And then finally, we encourage all our callers or watchers to join us, the Gay Liberation Network and allied organizations, in this year's Pride Parade. We always have a very political contingent here. That's going to be happening the last Sunday of the month, June 28th. And you can just send an email to that address on your screen there to find out when and where that we will be meeting. We encourage you to stand up for your rights and join us in that in this year's Pride Parade.